The Toronto Global Forum has grown from small beginnings 17 years ago to its current status of a global economic summit, and all under the watchful eye of the International Economic Forum of the Americas, or its acronym, the IEFA. Under the guidance of Nicholas Remillard. Nicholas, are you in the room? Under the guidance of Nicholas Remillard, the IFA now boasts 6 annual conferences: Toronto, Montreal, Miami, Paris, Buenos Aires, and for the first time next spring, you'll have to wait for that announcement. It's coming later. A very warm welcome to all of you, our partners, our speakers, and most importantly, our delegates in the room today. I particularly want to thank our presenting partner, Cogeco, that has helped guide the Toronto Global Forum to its current preeminent status. Thank you, Cogeco. Over the next 3 days, you will participate with domestic and global thought leaders in discussions around the major challenges facing the world today, and importantly, the opportunities that are available to each and every one of you. I encourage you to connect with one another throughout the conference. A substantial amount of business gets done every year at the Toronto Global Forum. And again, speaking of opportunities, we are delighted to be joined by a group of 14 youth volunteers from across the city of Toronto this week. This is an incredible group of young people who are looking to pursue careers in business, nursing, the trades, real estate, culinary arts, and hospitality. You're going to see our youth volunteers throughout the conference. I encourage you to talk with them, provide some advice and guidance, and perhaps provide an introduction or two to help them kickstart their careers here in the GTA. It's now my pleasure and honor to introduce John Beck, the founder and chairman of Aecon, and, happily for me, the chairman of the Toronto Global Forum Advisory Board. John has over 50 years of experience in the construction industry in Canada and internationally. His background includes corporate leadership in numerous construction activities and development of infrastructure such as airports, toll roads, and transit systems. Over the years, I have come to know John for his wisdom, his generosity of time, and above all, his honesty. He tells it like it is. John, welcome.
Thank you, Joe. Minister, friends, chers amis, a warm welcome to day 1 of the 17th edition of the Toronto Global Forum. It's truly a pleasure to be here live and in person with all of you. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi de vous souhaiter une chaleureuse bienvenue. First, I want to acknowledge the land we are meeting on in the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishkabeg, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendell people, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This 2023 edition of the Toronto Global Forum will be staged as a hybrid conference under the macro theme Fostering Economic Resilience, with a focus on finance, economy, innovation, infrastructure, energy, agriculture, trade, and health. The world has struggled with the devastating and lasting impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we now face new threats and continued challenges. The war in Ukraine, the war in the Middle East, rising inflation and high interest rates, as well as fires and hurricanes causing catastrophic damage to homes, businesses, and infrastructure. As founder and chairman of Aecon, my team and I are keenly interested in discussing how we not only manage these challenges, but also work at the forefront of the energy transition through the infrastructure we build and operate in support of global net zero goals. All of these topics and more will be explored during this important three-day meeting of global leaders. The Toronto Global Forum is uniting some of the world's top legislators, politicians, and economists, also Fortune 500 CEOs and industry experts together, live in person and online for impactful discussions on the major challenges ahead. This year's Toronto Global Forum will bring together more than 150 speakers and delegates representing around 65 countries. 100 journalists from around the world will be covering this event and its outcomes to their viewers, readers, and listeners. It's been my pleasure to serve as chair of the Toronto Global Forum Advisory Board for the past number of years. I've witnessed the TGF's growth and expanding reputation as the preeminent conference, certainly in North America and perhaps the world. I encourage all of you to actively participate in this year's event. For those attending virtually, the Toronto Global Forum organizers have built platforms allowing you to have discussions and meet virtually with your fellow delegates. If you're looking to expand your business, if you're looking for work, if you have job openings, let us and our public sector partners know, and most importantly, let your fellow delegates know. Finally, I want to express my sincere gratitude to the Toronto Global Forum Advisory Board and to our partners for their continued support and commitment. I'd be remiss if I didn't add that Aecon is proud to be a long-standing supporter of this event. In particular, I want to acknowledge the key role of our presenting partner, Cogeco. While the company's financial support is most welcome, we really value the advice and time given by my friends Philippe Jetté, the president and CEO, and Louis Audet, Cogeco's chair. It's now my pleasure to introduce Philippe and ask him to come on stage.
Good morning, and it's now my pleasure to welcome you to the Cogeco studio of the 17th edition of the Toronto Global Forum. Every year, this forum invites diverse stakeholders who are actively shaping our world's economy to discuss the challenges and opportunities that we're facing. And Cogeco is proud once again to sponsor this year's forum and be part of this productive and forward-thinking community. As president and CEO of a North American telecommunication and media company, I am very much looking forward to this forum and this year's theme, Fostering Economic Resilience. Resiliency is an apt term to describe the approach we must adopt to navigate today's economic climate. It suggests that there are significant obstacles we must meet, but with strength and innovation, we can surpass and overcome those obstacles. And not only we can recover, but we can also rise above them over time. Some of the foremost hurdles in today's world are the effect of climate change and economic downturns. We live in a world in a state of constant change, and the pace of change is rapid and the scale is striking. From the energy transition to the evolving geopolitical environment, and changing nature of globalization, from the social changes we are experiencing to the accelerated innovation in the field of AI, from ESG issues being pushed to the top of corporate agendas by stakeholders, to the impacts the climate change is having on our daily lives, which we've seen so vividly in the form of forest fires that have blanketed Canadian and North American cities in smoke. The best options today's decision maker have is to meet those challenges with resilience. A key part of this response is finding innovative answers to the problem we are facing. And as leaders, we must understand what's going on and influence where the world is headed at a time of historic transition. The impact on our companies, on global markets, on our society is simply too important. As a telecommunication and media company connecting over 1 million North Americans to the world and to each other, and providing high-quality information to our regional radio stations, realizing these opportunities lies at the forefront of our decision-making. And as Cogeco expands in new markets, continue building high-performing telecommunication networks that brings together people from across urban and regional centers, and transforming our radio business into a multi-platform audio content providers, we are investing in innovative and sustainable solutions that drive growth for our stakeholders. This is why Cogeco, once again, is eager to support the Toronto Global Forum, and which will provide us all with more insight on how we can rise to the challenges facing our economy and act on the opportunities they present to better serve our communities. That being said, I'm excited with our very first panel of the forum, aptly titled Fostering Economic Resilience. We look forward for this discussion to your participation and engagement in the event. And to kick off this 17th edition of the Toronto Global Forum in a good way, there are no better person than our next guest, the Honorable Anita Anand, President of the Treasury Board of Canada. Ms. Anand, the floor is yours. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Well, good morning, everyone. It is fantastic to be here with you this morning. Let's give it up for the organizers of the Toronto Global Forum. You know, fostering economic resilience is a powerful and timely theme. It resonates deeply with the work of our government and certainly with my work as president of the Treasury Board. But before launching into our economic policy, what I thought I would do is just back up a bit and give you a little bit of background about me and how I got to be, as president of the Treasury Board, talking about things like economic resilience, which is obviously so important for our country, towns and cities across this country. So 4 years ago in 2019, I was a professor of corporate and securities law at the University of Toronto, and I had been in that role at different universities for about 25 years, working on economic policy, looking at capital markets regulation, advising provincial and the federal government. And I was asked to run in the federal election that was upcoming in the fall. And imagine if someone asked you that and you'd been in a career for 25 years, your first answer is, no, I'm happy where I am. Usually that is your answer, I would think. And that was my answer. And so after a number of conversations, I decided to give it a shot. And I knew that I had my career to go back to at the University of Toronto, and it was a fantastic place to work, and I miss it dearly every single day. But I thought to myself that we need to all do our best in our lives to give back to our communities. And so I thought I'll run. And if the people of Oakville, Ontario, where I live and had lived for 16 or 17 years, wanted to elect me, they would. But I'll say that many people told me that I wouldn't get elected as a racialized woman living in Oakville, Ontario, that I wouldn't be successful. Many, many people told me that. And so I had to dig deep and say to myself, am I resilient enough to weather whatever storm comes my way and to give back to our country if I am elected to serve? And so ultimately, I won the nomination and I won the general election. And 2 weeks later, the Prime Minister called me in and asked me if I would be the Minister of Public Services and Procurement. And I didn't know what that was. It wasn't like defense or justice or something where the name really tells you what it is involving. And so I said to the Prime Minister, I would be so honored. And then I went home and looked up what it was that I was going to be honored to do. And this was about 2 months before the pandemic hit. And when the pandemic hit, we all kind of were living our own nightmare of how to figure out how we were going to survive as a family. And then for those of us in government. And I'll say that, and this is where I get to the point that I want to make today. What we had to do as a government was to pivot. And in order to be resilient, including to be economically resilient, we need to know how to pivot and we need to execute on the pivot. And so when I was the minister before the pandemic, people said to me, no one's going to know who you are. You're going to be able to be in the background in government and learn all about government. Then the pandemic hit and people said, do we have a procurement minister? And I found myself in press conferences, unlike you are in at the University of Toronto as a professor, I will say, which is a very solitary life. And I'll just say, though, that the ability to pivot individually or as governments or as businesses or as nonprofits is really the key to survival in difficult times and in good times, because we can never know what is around the corner. And so I remember we have 4 children, my husband and I. I remember one of the lessons people used to always tell us when we were just at the beginning of raising these 4 kids was you need to teach them to be resilient. And so it goes. It is no different when we're talking about small businesses, large businesses, governments, etc. And so let me just say that I then moved on to defense. And again, pivoting was key. There was no Russian invasion of Ukraine when I was appointed, but we had to pivot and supply Ukraine with the military equipment that it needs to fight and win this war. Now I find myself at the Treasury Board. And again, in times of economic difficulty in our country, the key is how are we going to show Canadians that we are fiscally responsible while investing in the Canadian economy and in our most vulnerable citizens. And that is really at the crux of our government's priority while we live in a time of high inflation, of rising interest rates. It is a time when we need to show Canadians that we are here for you and we will continue to work for you as we weather this economic storm. And so I'll start by talking about what we're doing at Treasury Board and then talk about our government's work to remain resilient and to pivot. So at the Treasury Board, one of the most important things we do is to watch every single program that is passed by the executive branch of government before it goes out the door. Everything from reconciliation to our EV investments to our health transfers to provinces, it is all coming through Treasury Board. So the fiscal lens that we put on each of these programs is extremely important because we're talking about billions of dollars. And so that's the framework that I approach every Treasury Board meeting. And I'll say on top of that, we are undertaking a spending review, which is making sure that in every ministry across our government, that there are savings to be found, and those savings can be redirected to our government's most important priorities: affordability, the green economy, reconciliation, healthcare. And so I have asked all of my ministerial colleagues to submit to me their plans to, in aggregate, save our government $15 billion per year over the next $15 billion over 5 years, and then $4 billion each year thereafter. And that, compared to the government spend overall, may not seem like a lot. But our government has not done that since 2015. And Canadian households across this country, ours included, are looking for ways to save money, and our government has to do that too. So on executive travel, on things like outsourcing, let's do better. Now, you might say to yourself, well, Canada's in a pretty good economic position relative to our peers. We have a AAA credit rating. We are the leader in terms of debt to GDP ratio in the G7. We have a very low unemployment rate. But we need to keep working. We see interest rates rising, we see inflation being high, and we are concentrated on this word, resilience, fostering economic resilience. Donc, comment est-ce que nous pouvons faire les choses nécessaires pour appuyer la population canadienne chaque jour, chaque année? Donc, il y a trois choses. There are three policy initiatives that I want to highlight. First is fostering a green economy. And you have seen us make investments in the EV battery sector, Stellantis, Volkswagen, Ford, for example. And all of those investments are marrying the goals of economic resilience with environmental sustainability and reaching a net carbon future by 2050. We see the demand for EV batteries skyrocketing. In fact, 240% increase in EV car sales over the past years. We need to continue to contribute to the green economy and our manufacturing sectors. And that's exactly what we're doing. Another example is in housing infrastructure. How did we pivot? We have seen our country now facing with a housing crisis. So what we did recently is to remove the GST on purpose-built rentals so that construction companies can build those affordable units more easily, more quickly, more efficiently. And then on natural resources, another area where we pivoted to develop a critical resource strategy. Canada's rich in critical minerals, and we as a country will become a leading supplier of choice by increasing the supply of these critical minerals, lithium included, an ingredient so necessary in the production of those EV batteries. And so let me just conclude by saying that we are very much focused on the pivot in our economic policy, and at the same time ensuring that the most vulnerable Canadians are not left behind. Whether it's with the Canada Child Benefit or early learning and childcare, those are the types of policies that must go along to ensuring a strong and resilient Canada. Now, the definition of resilience is the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties, from toughness. On a personal level, we all strive to be resilient, and I gave you a little bit of my personal story. I strive every day to be resilient, and certainly hope that my kids are as well. But we want the same for our economy. We want to ensure that we can always pivot in the difficult times and maintain that strength through the good times. I've given you some examples of the types of things we're doing as a government to pivot, and I hope that we can address some more of these policies in the Q&A. I'll just close by saying that Peter Drucker said that the best way to predict the future is to create it. And that's exactly what we are trying to do in the Government of Canada. And certainly my role as the President of the Treasury Board is to ensure we do just that. Thank you so much. So nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Paulette, Senior and President CEO of the Canadian Women's Foundation. Nice to see you all. Minister Anand, I am honored to be sharing the stage with you. Yeah, and thank you for your opening comments and kicking us off very early, but certainly we're here to hear you. So I want to just kind of expand on some of the things you said, and I made note of one of the quotes that you made earlier, which is being able to pivot and execute is key to our survival. And so I think that's well in line with the theme for this week, Global Forum. And so I want to kick off our conversation by talking about the fact that you pointed out the economic challenges that we're facing. So I wanted to dig a little bit further by asking about if you could just share with us some of the strategies and policies that you are pursuing currently. So you talked about the 3 areas, including housing, you talked about childcare, you talked about the green economy, but perhaps talk a little bit about how we're able to utilize all of that to pursue sort of sustainable growth.
So, jam-packed question, Paulette, thank you. The key really, I think, to executing on that mission, which I said involves pivoting and caring for the most vulnerable, does involve a mix of strategies which are difficult to enumerate in a very short response. But I will say that if you look at what we've been trying to do over the past years, it is to create a more level playing field so that the most vulnerable have the ability to contribute to our economy and economic growth generally. So let me just take one example, okay? The Canada Child Benefit was an initiative that Prime Minister Trudeau brought in during his first term. I was still at the University of Toronto, enjoying my solitary life. And I'll say that what that policy has done is to lift almost 500,000 kids out of poverty. That, to me, is an example of the way in which you create resilience across families and therefore across your country. Another good example is $10 a day childcare. We saw that during the pandemic that women and single mothers in particular were disproportionately and negatively affected by the pandemic. And we said that in order to enable those families to become resilient and to contribute to the workforce, there had to be supports in place. So those are 2 examples of policies that we have put in place to ensure that we're bringing the most vulnerable along, but we're also creating an economy where everyone can participate.
being the Canadian Women's Foundation, that's something that I know many of us have been fighting for a long time. So it's good to have those in place and to see it framed within economic growth and resilience. So I want to talk a little bit about the fact that next week, I don't know if everyone knows, is Small Business Week. And we also have seen that a lot of women have been leading the way in terms of small businesses as their way of being able to pursue their own economic growth, despite the barriers that are there. And you touched on this a little bit in some of your comments. And perhaps you can talk more about what are the specific levers that you're utilizing, particularly with your role now at Treasury Board, to support women and other folks to be able to succeed in small, especially during these economic times.
I think we cannot underestimate the importance of small business in the Canadian economy. Having taught corporate and securities law for 25 years, I know and can tell you that small businesses are indeed the backbone of our Canadian economy. They may go public too early, which is something I used to talk about with my students, but they are at root family-run businesses that are holding up much of our local and certainly in aggregate our national economy. And so, what we have done, and certainly you saw this through the pandemic, is to put in place supports for small businesses and those who are employed by small businesses to be able to be resilient through the crisis and beyond. And I'll give you one example, which is the CEBA loan. The CEBA loan, I am told over and over again how important it is for small businesses. Another example was the CERB, another way in which people could remain resilient even though they weren't working. And so recently our government extended some of the timelines for the CERB, the loans to small businesses. And I'll say that that process of hearing from chambers of commerce and boards of trade across the country, which then led to a change in government policy, really showed me the power of the advocacy that chambers and small businesses do. And in fact, when I saw the Prime Minister on July 25th, when he asked me to become the President of Treasury Board, he said to me, I want you to go speak with small businesses across the country. That's how important that mission is, because we recognize the importance that small business plays as the backbone of our national economy.
And that is definitely true. And small businesses are struggling in many different ways. And we're also in a very rapidly changing environment when it comes to technology. And the use of technology these days, and I think in the near future, will determine the success or not of small businesses, but all of us, whether we're running for-profit or nonprofit organizations. So could you talk about what's being used to support the advancement of technology that small businesses can access? I mean, AI is one of those tools that everyone's talking about right now, but what's the government doing to support the use of technology and being able to access that for their growth?
So technology is one area where the pivot is so incredibly important. And I know that my colleague, Minister Champagne, whose portfolio involves the implementation of technologies across the country and the upgrading of technologies generally speaking, is very focused on AI and has recently launched an AI strategy. For my part, as president of the Treasury Board, I am also focused on technology. We are the largest employer in the country at 250,000 employees. Recently, I launched an AI set of guidelines for the use of AI in the public sector. Secondly is digitization. We know that we can be better in terms of government services. Anybody who has experienced in the past going to Service Canada, looking for a passport, looking for a visa, looking for a PR card, has probably said to themselves, this could be more efficient. And so at the Treasury Board, my job is really to work with Terry Beach, Minister of Services, to say, how are we going to digitize government? And you are going to see change coming in terms of increased efficiency in those processes, because digitization, you are exactly right, is the important pivot for us as a government now.
So I want to pivot a little bit. Seems to be the theme of this morning's talk. Because I think one of the things that a lot of us will experience is the lack of communication between different government departments and agencies. And so I want you to just take a moment and share with us the way that, or the strategies you're using to collaborate across government to make the process of access and being able to move forward on particular initiatives or business strategies that folks have. What are you doing to ensure that there's greater smoothness around how folks can interact with government across agencies and departments?
Really building on my last point, we need to make sure we are as accessible as possible. And that is going to mean moving away from paper-based systems to online applications and approvals. And so whether we're talking about visas or whether we're talking about PR cards or passports, we have to make sure that we are as efficient as possible. And so right now, I'm examining the practices in our peer countries, Australia, for example, and we can do better in this area.
Any specific thing that comes to light?
All of this is part of adopting new technology to undertake our government operations. Whether we're talking about payments out to people through the Phoenix Pay system, we can do better. Whether it is talking about switching from one insurer to another, from Sun Life to Canada Life right now, we've got to continue to do better. And these are items that are within my portfolio at the Treasury Board. They are items that I touch every single day, and I love a challenge. So that's exactly what we are working on. We've got to make government as efficient as possible, and that is going to lead to more economic resiliency among the Canadian population.
So I want to wrap up with my final question, which you touched on in your earlier comments regarding the green economy. And these days, we can't talk about economic growth without also talking about climate. So it will be important, I think, that the government thinks about how it is that we're going to move forward for sustainable economic growth, while we're also experiencing serious climate issues that are impediments to that growth. So what kind of strategies are you utilizing to make sure that that's an inclusive approach?
Well, I think you can see the importance of marrying environmental sustainability with our economic policies across a range of initiatives that we've been implementing. I mentioned EV battery production. I'm from Oakville. The Ford plant is located in Oakville. Recently, the federal government and the provincial government each put in about $500 million to ensure that the Oakville Ford plant can become a manufacturer of EV vehicles. That to me shows the resilience and the commitment of two levels of government to a new form of manufacturing and ultimately a new form of vehicles. It's a model for cooperation across government, and it's a model for the way in which our manufacturing sector is moving because of our commitment to environmental sustainability. Canada is going to be now a leader in EV battery production, whether it is because of the St. Thomas investment or Windsor, Ontario, Oakville, Ontario, Quebec. This is going to be critical to Canada becoming a hub for these vehicles. And I think marrying the two principles, a commitment to manufacturing and a commitment to environmental sustainability is really what is at the heart of.
Where do the provinces come in that work?
So we are seeing with housing, with healthcare, with environmental policy, with reconciliation, with affordability, all of these initiatives cannot be done by the federal government alone. We need to ensure that we are cooperating with the provinces and indeed with municipal governments in the area of housing, for example. So my approach to politics is always to reach across party lines, to reach across government lines, to ensure that we are getting the best result possible for Canadians. And so you won't see me arguing vociferously with my colleagues on the other side of the House. I actually invite them to have a meeting with me to discuss some of our differences so we can reach an agreement in the middle that will serve our constituents, broadly speaking. And I think that's what we need to do in these difficult economic times, in uncertain international times. The only way through these difficult moments is together.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minister. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. And please join me in thanking Minister Anand for joining us this morning.